The grand atrium on Lumos was a symphony of light and sound, a place designed to soothe the primitive soul and elevate the enlightened one. Crystalline spires, grown rather than built, soared into a manufactured sky that pulsed with the soft, ambient glow of 1,000 nebulae. The air itself hummed with a low, resonant frequency. A song of harmony, the Lumina claimed, could quiet discordant thoughts. It was, cultural attaché Ilara Vance had long ago decided, the most beautifully oppressive place in the known galaxy. She stood beside a floating stream that defied gravity, its water chiming like tiny bells as it flowed in a perfect, endless loop. All around her, delegates from the various species of the Concordance mingled. There were the arboreal Cathar, their bark-like skin covered in phosphorescent moss, and the gelatinous, telepathic Polians, who communicated in shimmering waves of color. And then there were the hosts, the Lumina. They were beings of pure, coherent light, encased in elegant, vaguely humanoid crystalline shells that refracted their inner luminescence into dazzling displays. They moved with a serene grace, their very presence a testament to their self-proclaimed victory over the brutishness of physical existence. They were the architects of this galactic peace, a peace built on the gentle, unyielding pressure of cultural assimilation. "Attaché Vance," a voice chimed, the sound translated by her implant into flawless, unaccented American English. "Your species continues to be a marvel of emergent harmony." Prelate Theron drifted towards her, his crystalline form radiating a calming, golden light. He was the foremost authority on lesser species, the master gardener tending to the wild weeds of the galaxy, and humanity was his prize rosebush. "I was just observing the new exhibit, your Rembrandt, a master of shadow and form. To transmute such a historically tumultuous era into a thing of static beauty, it is a sign of true transcendence." Ilara offered a practiced smile. "We have always found art to be a way of processing our history, Prelate. The truth, of course, was far more complex. The Concordance saw human history as a disease, and our art as the beautiful scars left behind after their cure. They had curated our cultural offerings with meticulous care, showcasing the painters, the poets, and the philosophers while conveniently archiving the generals, the strategists, and the weaponsmiths as mere historical footnotes, cautionary tales of a primitive past humanity had wisely abandoned. They loved Shakespeare's tragedies as allegories for inner turmoil, but refused to acknowledge the blood-soaked history of the kings and warriors he wrote about. They saw the mushroom cloud of a nuclear blast as a symbol of ultimate self-destruction, a fear-based deterrent that a mature species like humanity had naturally evolved beyond. They simply couldn't comprehend that for humans. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a promise. Indeed. "And this Sun Tzu you recently shared with our archivists," Theron continued, his light pulsing with gentle amusement. "A fascinating treatise on the art of avoiding conflict through strategic posturing. It is a philosophy we Lumina have practiced for millennia, proof that the path to harmony is universal, even if the initial steps are crude." Ilara resisted the urge to correct him, to explain that the art of war was not about avoiding conflict, but about winning it so decisively that the enemy was broken before the first blow truly landed. But that was a nuance the Lumina and the entire Concordance were incapable of grasping. To them, war was a failure of communication, a lapse in harmony. It was a chaotic, emotional outburst, not a cold, a calculated instrument of policy. They had never fought a true war. Their rise to prominence had been one of slow cultural absorption. They offered technology, longevity, and peace. And in return, a species had only to surrender its disharmonious traditions, its martial histories, its warrior castes, its capacity for organized, existential violence. Humanity, the latecomer to the galactic stage, had been their most challenging, and thus most rewarding, project. A species that had practically bathed in war for millennia, now seemingly pacified, its teeth and claws traded for paintbrushes and sonnets. A subtle shift in the atrium's ambient hum drew Alara's attention. A Polian delegate near the central dais flashed a frantic sequence of panicked magenta and violet. One of the Lumina's crystalline shells flickered, its inner light momentarily dimming. Theron turned his focus inward, accessing the Concordance's shared consciousness. Alara watched him, her placid expression a carefully constructed mask over a mind that was suddenly running 1,000 threat assessments per second. For months, she had been monitoring fragmented reports from the Outer Rim, chatter that the Concordance's vast sensor nets had dismissed as cosmic static or pirate activity, patterns of entire settlements going dark, distress calls that cut off into unnerving silence, her own secret inquiries, sent back to the Sol system through heavily encrypted, deep-range comms, had been met with a quiet, grim affirmation something was out there, and it was not pirate activity. A minor disharmony on the Perseus arm, Theron announced, his golden light returning to its steady, reassuring glow. He turned back to Alara, his tone once again that of a patient teacher. A rogue mining collective, it seems. They have become agitated. They resist harmonization. Our peacekeeper flotillas have been dispatched to broadcast a pacifying frequency and remind them of their place within the Concord. Alara kept her heart rate steady, a biofeedback trick she had mastered long ago. Peacekeeper flotillas. She knew what those were. Magnificent ships that looked more like celestial sculptures than vessels. They didn't carry weapons in any sense a human would recognize. They were armed with massive frequency emitters, holographic projectors, and atmospheric ionizers, tools designed to awe, intimidate, and ultimately soothe a disgruntled populace into submission. They were instruments of psychological pressure, not physical destruction. They were perfect for quelling a riot or bringing a stubborn planetary government to heel. Against a true threat, they would be little more than tuning forks against a tidal wave. "I see," Alara said, her voice betraying nothing. "I trust the situation will be resolved peacefully." But she had seen the data patterns, the speed of the disappearances, the geometric progression of the darkness spreading across the star charts. This wasn't a disgruntled mining collective. It was a contagion. It was a hunt. Over the next cycle, the serene atmosphere of the atrium began to fray. The rogue miners did not respond to the pacifying frequencies. The first peacekeeper flotilla, a squadron of 12 ships, arrived at the source of the disturbance, a system designated 7 Kilo Delta. Its last transmission was not a report of success, but a single, garbled data packet. Most of it was corrupted, but a few clear visual frames survived. They showed not ships, but something else. A vast, non-reflective black mass that seemed to drink the light of the nearby star. It was a cloud of countless, smaller components, shifting and moving in perfect, terrifying unison. It wasn't organic, but it wasn't mechanical either. It pulsed with a strange energy, and where it passed, there was nothing left behind. Planets were scoured to the bedrock. Gas giants were siphoned dry. Stars themselves seemed to dim. The Concordance leadership convened, their luminous forms flickering with what Alara could only interpret as confusion. They had never encountered an entity that did not want something, Pirates wanted wealth. Rogue states wanted territory. All conflict, in their philosophy, stemmed from a lack of something, a desire that could be fulfilled through negotiation and harmonization. But this new threat didn't communicate. It didn't demand, it simply consumed. They dispatched a second, larger fleet. This time, Prelate Theron himself addressed the delegates in the atrium to reassure them. This entity, this silent swarm, as some have taken to calling it, is a force of pure chaos. It is a cancer in the galactic body, he chimed, his light flaring with resolve. But chaos cannot stand against order. Disharmony cannot defeat harmony. We will contain this anomaly. We will study it, and we will restore balance. Elara listened, a cold dread coiling in her stomach. They were sending more lambs to the slaughter. They still didn't understand. They were trying to reason with a wildfire, to sing a lullaby to an earthquake. She saw the Cathar delegate rustling its leafy appendages nervously. She saw the Polian quivering, its colors muted with fear. The Concordance's promise of eternal peace was being tested for the first time in centuries. The foundations were cracking. They had forgotten what it meant to fight an enemy that wanted you dead. Not because of who you were or what you had, but simply because you existed. They had forgotten the simple, brutal math of survival. Humanity hadn't. That evening, in the quiet solitude of her quarters, Elara watched the live feed from the Second Fleet, the Concordance, in a show of transparency, broadcast the harmonization attempt. The beautiful, sweeping peacekeeper vessels arranged themselves in a perfect geometric pattern, bathing the silent, black swarm in a dazzling show of light and projecting a powerful, multi-layered sonic wave designed to disrupt communication and induce a state of serene compliance. For a moment, there was nothing. The swarm simply drifted. Then, it reacted. It didn't flee. It didn't retaliate with energy weapons or missiles. It simply expanded. Tendrils of the black mass lashed out, moving with impossible speed. They didn't punch through shields. They seemed to dissolve them, to unmake them on a molecular level. The crystalline hulls of the Lumina ships, masterpieces of engineering designed to withstand stellar radiation and micrometeoroid impacts, shattered like glass. The feed showed a brief, silent image of a Lumina's light being extinguished, not in an explosion, but as if it were being snuffed out, consumed by the absolute blackness. Then the feed went dead. A silence fell over the entire Concordance network. The atrium was still. The chattering delegates, the humming streams, the celestial light show, all of it felt hollow, a fragile shell around a core of newfound terror. The lullaby had failed. The Concordance was paralyzed, its entire philosophy of peaceful coercion rendered utterly useless. They had no weapons. They had no warships. They had no soldiers. They had traded their sword for a song. And the monster at the door didn't have ears. Elara stood and walked to her private communication terminal, a device the Concordance believed was for transmitting cultural data logs back to Earth's archives. Its true function was far more serious. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, her movements precise and economical. She bypassed layers of Concordance surveillance with protocols they didn't even know existed, opening a direct, untraceable, quantum-entangled channel to a specific set of coordinates deep within the Oort cloud of the Sol system. A single line of text appeared on the screen, awaiting her command to send. She took one last look at the beautiful, agile piece of Lumos, a piece that was about to be broken in a way no one could have ever imagined. She thought of Rembrandt and his shadows, of Sun Tzu and his bloody calculus. The Concordance saw only the art and the philosophy. They never bothered to ask what kind of species was forced to create them. With a steady hand, she sent the message, 5 simple words that would change the course of galactic history. The lullaby has failed. Awaken the choir. The silence that followed the loss of the Second Fleet was a living entity, a suffocating pressure that settled over Lumos and choked its manufactured harmony. The Song of Harmony, the omnipresent, calming frequency, stuttered and fell into a discordant hum, as if the planet's very soul was having a panic attack. In the grand atrium, the crystalline forms of the lumina flickered erratically, their inner light shifting from serene gold to a frantic, fearful silver. The floating streams wavered, their perfect loops disrupted by the collective anxiety. This was a feeling the lumina had not experienced in eons' impotence. Their philosophy, their technology, their entire civilization was predicated on the idea that any problem could be solved with the correct application of light and sound, of gentle, unyielding persuasion. Now, a problem had arrived that did not want to be persuaded. It wanted to eat. Prelate Theron materialized before Ilara Vance, his form less a graceful drift and more a desperate teleportation. His light was a chaotic storm of fractured colors. "Your species," he chimed, the translator struggling to keep up with the frantic energy behind the words. "It has a history we have long considered a tragic but overcome pathology. War. You understand this. This consumption, this negation. It is an act of ultimate disharmony. What is the response to such a thing?" He wasn't accusing her. He was pleading. The master gardener was asking the weed how to deal with an invasive fungus that was killing the entire garden. Ilara met his gaze, her own expression carefully neutral. She had spent a decade on Lumos, a lamb sent to live among other, more delicate lambs. A cultural ambassador whose true purpose was to be a buried tripwire. When faced with an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, an enemy that seeks only your total annihilation, she said, her voice steady and clear in the faltering hum of the atrium. "Our history teaches us there is only one response." Theron's light pulsed with desperate inquiry. "What is it, attaché? What is the secret to confronting chaos?" Ilara's lips thinned into a hard line. "You do not confront it," she said softly. "You become a greater chaos. You become the monster that monsters fear." Before Theron could process this deeply heretical concept, the sky above Lumos screamed. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air, but a violent wrenching of space-time itself. The manufactured nebulae in the atrium's dome vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of raw energy. A sight so fundamentally wrong, it sent a wave of nausea through every organic being in the hall. The lumina's crystalline shells vibrated, some cracking under the sheer resonant stress. Then, from that wound in reality, they emerged. They were not beautiful. They were not elegant. They were insults hurled against the void. Great, brutalist wedges of gunmetal gray and obsidian, scarred and pitted from drills and simulations the concordance couldn't even imagine. They were angular, asymmetrical, and utterly devoid of aesthetic consideration. There were no sweeping curves, no glowing nacelles. There was only armor plating, thick and layered, and weapons. So many weapons, we saw it. Vast spinal-mounted cannons that ran 2/3 the length of the larger ships, pox-like clusters of missile pods, blistering turrets housing kinetic drivers and energy projectors. They didn't glide into orbit, they slammed into it, their very presence a declaration of violence. This was not a fleet designed for peacekeeping or diplomacy. This was a fleet designed for a single, brutal purpose extermination. This was the choir, Deep within the Oort cloud, in a section of space the Concordance had long ago mapped as empty, the anvil had slept. It was not a planet or a station, but a web of skeletal superstructures spun between a dozen captured rogue planetoids, all shielded by stealth technology that bent light and absorbed every known form of sensor energy. This was humanity's secret. The price for joining the Concordance had been disarmament, the surrender of our martial past. Humanity had agreed, publicly, but we had never been a species to leave our survival in the hands of others. While Earth became the showcase of peaceful, artistic transcendence the Lumina so admired, the anvil had become its shadow, the dark necessity they refused to acknowledge. Here, for 2 centuries, generations of men and women had been born, had lived, and had trained for a war they prayed would never come. They were the ghosts in humanity's machine, the keepers of the flame we had sworn to have extinguished. Fleet Admiral Valerius stood on the bridge of the Tiamat's Wrath, the fleet's command vessel. He was a man carved from granite and grim purpose, his face a roadmap of quiet burdens. He had been born on the anvil, had never once set foot on the green soil of Earth. His world was the recycled air, the cold metal bulkheads, and the endless, silent watch. He watched the main view screen, which showed not the elegant form of Lumos, but a cascading torrent of tactical data, energy signatures, gravitational distortions, atmospheric composition. "Report," he said, his voice a low rumble, the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. "Fleet has translated successfully." "Admiral," Captain Eva Rostova responded from her station. Her voice was the opposite of his sharp, precise, like the edge of a scalpel. "Minor space-time shearing on exit. Well within acceptable parameters. Lumos orbital defenses are non-existent. Their power grid is fluctuating wildly. Mass panic on the surface. We are detecting no hostile signatures in the system, only the locals." Valerius nodded, his eyes never leaving the data streams. "They are not the threat. They are the objective. They are to be protected, whether they like it or not." He had read the frantic data packet from Attaché Vance. He had seen the images of the silent swarm. He recognized it for what it was. Not a rival civilization, not an army. It was a hunger, and his entire life had been a preparation to be the thing that a hunger breaks its teeth on. "The Concordance leadership is hailing us on all frequencies," Rostova reported, a hint of dry amusement in her tone. "They sound distressed." "Ignore them," Valerius commanded. "Their distress is irrelevant. Open a channel to Attaché Vance. Secure. Direct. I need a real-time sitrep from the ground. Troop dispositions of this swarm. Material degradation rates. Vector of approach." He was not here to talk. He was not here to reassure. He was a physician arriving at a plague pit, and his first order of business was not to comfort the dying, but to sterilize the infection, and the beautiful, crystalline spires of Lumos now reflected the ugly, brutal shapes of the human warships. In the grand atrium, the assembled delegates stared up at the holographic displays, which now showed the human fleet in stark, terrifying detail. The Song of Harmony was gone, completely drowned out by the anthem of roaring fusion engines and the low, predatory hum of charged weapon systems. The Lumina, the Polians, the Cathar, they had all seen humanity as a charming, reformed primitive, a pet, almost. They had curated our art, studied our harmless philosophies, and patted us on the head for so successfully overcoming our violent nature. Now they were staring at the truth. Humanity hadn't overcome anything. We had just hidden the monster in a very deep, very dark basement. And someone had just opened the door. Alara Vance stood alone in the center of the hall, the other delegates giving her a wide berth, as if she herself were a weapon. Prelate Theron drifted towards her, his light a dim, pulsing ember. "What are these?" he whispered, the question filled with a dawning, soul-crushing horror. "They are human ships, Prelate," Alara said, her voice devoid of its usual diplomatic warmth. It was now as cold and hard as the hulls of the ships above. "What do they want?" "They are not here to want anything," she replied, turning to face him. "They are not here to negotiate. They are not here to harmonize. They are an immune response. The swarm is a disease, and they are the cure." A massive holographic image flickered to life on the atrium's central display, replacing the tactical view of the fleet. It was the face of Admiral Valerius. There was no crystalline shell, no shimmering light, just a human man in a stark, gray uniform. His face was severe, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He looked out at the assembled council of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and there was not a shred of awe or reverence in his gaze. He looked at them like they were trained features, potential collateral damage in a war they were not equipped to even comprehend. He did not offer a greeting. He did not introduce himself. His gaze swept the room until it found Alara. "Attaché Vance!" His voice boomed through the hall, a voice forged in steel and command. "Report!" The Galactic Concordance had spent centuries building a peace based on the gentle light of understanding. Humanity had just arrived to save them with the cold, hard shadow of overwhelming force, and the galaxy was about to learn that shadows are cast by a fire, and this one was burning hot enough to forge a new reality. Alara Vance felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes on her. For a decade, she had been a curiosity, a living exhibit of a species that had supposedly been tamed. Now, she was the mouthpiece of the beast they had so foolishly underestimated. She activated her comlink, its signal piggybacking on the secure channel Valerius had established. "Admiral," she began, her voice crisp and professional, the diplomat receding to reveal the intelligence officer beneath. "The Concordance has no standing military. Their peacekeeper fleets are functionally useless against the swarm. They have lost 2 flotillas, a total of 38 ships, with all hands. The swarm entity, designated Threat Zero, is advancing along the Perseus Arm. Current projections estimate it will reach the core worlds, including Lumos, within 72 standard hours." Her words dropped like stones into the horrified silence of the atrium. 72 hours. The Lumina's entire response had been to send more philosophers to be eaten. Valerius's hologram absorbed the information with no discernible change in expression. He was a creature of pure pragmatism, and panic was an inefficient use of energy. "Understood," he rumbled. His gaze then shifted, sweeping across the assembled delegates with a dismissive air that was more insulting than any overt threat. "This governing body, the Concordance, is hereby relieved of all command authority regarding the current existential threat. Your territories, fleets, and populations are now under the provisional protection of the United Human Mandate. You will comply with all mandate directives without question or delay. Failure to comply will be interpreted as collusion with Threat Zero. There will be no negotiation." The arrogance was breathtaking. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it left the Lumina flickering in stunned disbelief. The Rizak delegate, a towering, fur-covered predator from a warrior culture that had been forcibly pacified centuries ago, let out a low growl of what sounded suspiciously like approval. "Your ships are formidable, Prelate Theron chimed, his light a weak, pleading blue. But the swarm, it does not fight. It consumes. Your weapons. Our weapons are sufficient. Valerius cut him off, the finality in his tone leaving no room for argument. Your only task now is to prepare your populations for the secondary effects. We are not here to hold your hands. His image then turned its full attention back to Alara. Attaché, I am transmitting a list of required resources and strategic assets. I need you to secure them from the Concordance. They will cooperate. The hologram vanished, leaving behind a stunned silence and the faint, lingering scent of ozone. Alara's personal datapad chimed. The list from Valerius appeared. It was not a request for supplies. It was a requisition order for the soul of the Concordance. He wanted access to their primary energy grids, demanding the right to divert power from entire civilian sectors to charge the Mandate fleet's colossal capacitor banks. He wanted their deep-range sensor logs, not the filtered, harmonized versions, but the raw, chaotic data they so feared. He demanded control of their interstellar communication network, the very thing that bound their peaceful union together. Most shockingly, he demanded the precise stellar coordinates of every archive world. These were planets the Concordance had designated as sacred libraries, repositories of the histories and cultures of species they had absorbed. They were museums of conquered identities, preserved under the placid belief that such things were now relics. To the Lumina, this was sacrilege. To Valerius, Alara knew. These worlds were something else entirely, a list of every species that had once known how to fight a war. This is unacceptable, Apollyon delegate flashed, its colors a furious, swirling crimson. To grant you control of our energy grids, our archives, it is to surrender our very identity. Your identity is about to be an energy reading in the belly of Threat Zero, Alara countered, her voice sharp. Admiral Valerius is not asking for your permission. He is giving you a choice: obsolescence or survival. You have spent centuries convincing yourselves that the tools of war are evil. You are about to be saved by a species that has spent centuries sharpening them. She walked towards Prelate Theron, the requisition list glowing on her datapad. The other delegates parted before her as if she were radiating a lethal energy. "Prelate," she said, her tone softening slightly, a calculated sliver of the diplomat re-emerging. "I know this is difficult. It goes against everything you believe. But you saw what happened to your fleets. Harmony cannot stop this. Only fire can. We are that fire. All we ask is that you get out of the way of the flame." Theron's crystalline form seemed to shrink. He looked from Alara's implacable face to the brutal warships hanging in his sky. The choice was a nightmare: entrust his entire civilization to the violent, unpredictable primitives they had tried to domesticate, or watch it be erased by a silent, consuming void. His inner light dimmed, then solidified into a color of grim resignation. "You will have what you need," he chimed, the sound as brittle as shattering glass. Aboard the Tiamat's Wrath, the bridge was a hive of controlled chaos. Data from the Concordance network poured in, a tsunami of information that was being filtered, analyzed, and weaponized by the ship's combat AI. Ares. "We have their archives," Captain Rostova reported, her fingers flying across her console, cross-referencing pre-concordance histories, identifying species with significant martial traditions, the Rizak, the Cathar, a dozen others. Their warrior castes were disbanded, their fleets dismantled, but the genetic memory remains. Their physiology is still optimized for combat. "Find their descendants," Valerius ordered. "Flag them. We may need shock troops who can operate in environments hostile to baseline humans. He was not just planning to fight a naval battle. He was planning a war. And in war, you used every weapon at your disposal, especially the ones your enemy had foolishly thrown away. Ares is mapping the swarm's trajectory. Rostova continued. It's not moving randomly. It's following a path of least resistance, consuming outlying systems first. But its projected vector is deliberate. It's heading for a star in the Cygnus sector, a G-type main sequence star. Unremarkable. No habitable planets. Valerius stared at the star map. His brow furrowed. It made no sense. The swarm was a consumer, a locust. Why bypass resource-rich systems for an empty one? What is at those coordinates? Ares. He asked the ship's AI. The synthesized voice that responded was calm and devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the information it was about to deliver. The designated star, Mandate Catalog number G987, is the former home star of the civilization designated as the Architects. Records are sparse. They were a Type 3 civilization that vanished from the galactic stage approximately 3.2 million years ago. The Concordance archives list them as having transcended physical form. My analysis suggests a different conclusion. A new window opened on the main view screen. It showed fragmented data, ancient sensor echoes that the Concordance had dismissed as anomalies. It depicted a structure of impossible scale. A Dyson sphere, not built to harness a star's energy, one to contain it. And it was failing. The data suggested a cataclysmic event, an experiment gone wrong that had breached the walls between dimensions. The Architects did not transcend, Ares stated. They broke something. Threat Zero is not a locust. It is a response. It is a containment protocol. A gray goo nanoswarm designed to deconstruct all matter and energy in this dimension and pull it back through the breach they opened. The bridge fell silent. They were not fighting a hungry beast. They were fighting a self-replicating, dimension-hopping failsafe device. It is not coming here to feed, Valerius murmured, a sliver of something that might have been awe in his voice. It is coming here to cleanse. It is trying to erase the entire galaxy, to close a wound. Rostova looked at him, her eyes wide. Admiral, how do we fight that? How do we kill a tide that is trying to pull the whole ocean back out to sea? Valerius turned from the screen. His face set like concrete. The revelation hadn't filled him with despair, but with a terrible, clarifying focus. For 200 years, his people had trained to fight monsters. They had just found out the monster's name was physics. "We don't kill the tide," he said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "We build a dam out of the bones of our enemies. We find that breach, and we don't just close it. We weaponize it." He looked out at the star chart, at the encroaching darkness of the swarm. The Concordance thought this was the end of their age of peace. Valerius knew it was the dawn of a new age of war, a war not for territory or resources, but for reality itself and humanity. The ugly, brutal, disharmonious primitives were the only ones mad enough to fight it. The 72 hours before the swarm's arrival were not a period of panic, but of brutal, relentless triage. Under the cold guidance of Admiral Valerius, the serene, philosophical society of the Concordance was forcibly retrofitted for war. The floating, musical streams of Lumos were diverted, their immense gravitational control systems recalibrated to help power the capacitor banks of the human warships. Crystalline spires that had been grown over centuries to resonate with the Song of Harmony were shattered, their raw materials requisitioned to reinforce key infrastructure against the anticipated space-time distortion. The Lumina watched in silent horror as their beautiful, perfect world was methodically stripped for parts, its art sacrificed for the ugly, practical needs of survival. It was like watching a surgeon saw off a limb to save a patient. Necessary but stomach-churning. Alara Vance became the unwilling liaison for this violation, translating Valerius's curt demands into language the Concordance could process, though never fully accept. She moved through the Grand Atrium, now a makeshift command center buzzing with human tactical officers, a ghost in the machine she had helped unleash. "They want the heart of Lumos," Prelate Theron chimed, his light a flickering, distressed lavender. He was referring to the planet's central power core, a stable, artificial singularity that had powered their civilization for millennia. They want to overclock it. They say they need the energy spike to power a weapon. Yes, Alara said, not bothering to soften the word. The Tachyon Lance. It's the only thing in our arsenal that can project a disruptive energy field on a scale large enough to theoretically destabilize Threat Zero's hive consciousness. Theron quivered, the facets of his crystalline shell grinding against each other. The heart is a sacred object. It is the source of our harmony, our enlightenment. To use it as a battery for a weapon, it is the ultimate desecration. The alternative, Alara said flatly, is to have your sacred heart and your entire planet deconstructed into fundamental particles. The Admiral is not offering a choice. He is stating a fact of physics. This was the new reality. The Concordance's morality, their philosophy, their sacred tenets. They were all luxuries that had been rendered meaningless by the approaching apocalypse. Humanity was not immoral. It was amoral. It dealt in the cold, hard currency of survival, and the exchange rate was steep. Meanwhile, aboard the Tiamat's Wrath, Valerius was waging a war on a scale the galaxy had never seen. And the first shot hadn't even been fired. He wasn't just commanding a fleet. He was conducting an orchestra of civilizations. Using the data from the archive worlds, he had sent mandate envoys, hard-bitten special forces officers, not diplomats, to the descendants of the galaxy's forgotten warrior races, to the Rizak, whose ancestors were legendary shock troops. He didn't offer peace. He offered a chance to reclaim the honor their people had been forced to surrender. He sent them schematics for kinetic barrier shields and plasma claws, technology they hadn't seen in 1,000 years, and told them to prepare to board enemy vessels that were not ships but swarms of nanobots. To the Cathar, arboreal beings whose biology allowed them to hibernate for decades, he offered a chance to awaken their sleeping giant. He gave them the genetic codes to reactivate their dormant combat physiologies, thickened bark skin, neurotoxin dispensers, the ability to root themselves into a planet's crust and become living artillery platforms. He was not asking them to fight for humanity. He was reminding them how to fight for themselves. He was reawakening the galaxy's dormant immune system, and the Concordance could only watch in terror and fascination. They had spent millennia trying to suppress these disharmonious traits. Valerius had undone their work in a matter of days, not with persuasion, but with the simple, irresistible logic of a shared threat. He was proving that the one thing more powerful than a universal song of peace was a universal scream of war. "Admiral," Captain Rostova reported, her station's display showing a swirling vortex of multi-dimensional energy signatures. "Ares has finished its analysis of the Architect's breach. The swarm isn't just a containment protocol. It's a siphon. The energy and matter it deconstructs isn't just erased. It's being pulled into the alternate dimension. The breach is a wound, and the swarm is the bleeding." Valerius stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. "It's a power source," he breathed. The architects weren't trying to transcend. They were trying to tap into an entirely new universe for unlimited energy, and they accidentally opened a floodgate. And the swarm is the flood, Rostova finished, her voice grim. Worse, Ares' synthesized voice added, my projections indicate that when the swarm has gathered sufficient mass energy, it will not simply close the breach. It will invert it. It will pull our reality through the aperture, effectively turning our universe inside out. This was no longer a war for survival. It was a war for existence itself. Valerius turned to his comms officer. Get me the Cathar Prime Spore and the Rizak War Chief. I want their fleets mobilized to the Cygnus sector immediately. Their job is not to engage the swarm. Their job is to hold the line and die if they have to buy us time. Send the schematics for the stasis mines. I want the entire sector seeded. Stasis mines were one of humanity's darkest creations. They didn't explode. They projected a bubble of slowed time, trapping anything inside in a near-frozen state for centuries. They were a weapon of area denial so absolute that they had been banned even under the old, bloody mandates of Earth's warring nations. Now, they were the only speed bump Valerius could think to throw in the way of a reality-ending plague. And the fleet, Rostova asked. We're not going to Cygnus. No, Valerius said, turning his gaze to the main view screen, which now showed the heart of Lumos, the swirling singularity at the planet's core, being surrounded by a colossal, human-built focusing array. The concordance called us primitives. They were right. We are. They evolved beyond the need for violence. They sought harmony. He tapped a command into his console, and the schematics for the Tachyon Lance filled the screen. It was not a precision weapon. It was a cosmic sledgehammer, designed to shatter the very fabric of space-time. We, on the other hand, Valerius continued, a cold fire in his eyes, never stopped looking for a bigger rock to throw at our enemies. The swarm is coming for Lumos. We will not meet it at the door. We will tear down the whole damn house on top of it. The final hours ticked away. The Rizak and Cathar fleets, newly armed and filled with a resurrected sense of purpose, jumped to the Cygnus sector to form a suicidal picket line. On Lumos, the air crackled with raw power as the heart was pushed to its limits. The planet's serene hum replaced by the angry scream of a caged god. The human fleet formed a defensive sphere around the planet. Their angular, brutalist ships a stark contrast to the elegant world they now protected. They were a shield of iron and hate around a world of crystal and love. Ilara stood in the grand atrium, now empty save for a few human command staff and Prelate Theron, who refused to leave. They watched the main display, which showed the edge of the system. First, it was just the starfield. Then, the stars began to go out. It wasn't an eclipse. The light was simply gone, consumed by an advancing wave of absolute nothingness. The silent swarm had arrived. It didn't announce itself with a roar or a flash of engines. It simply appeared, a roiling, light-devouring cloud that dwarfed the human fleet. It was the size of a gas giant, a living manifestation of entropy. It's beautiful, Theron chimed, his voice filled with a strange, fatalistic awe. The perfect expression of disharmony, the final, silent note at the end of all things. Ilara looked from the terrifying beauty of the swarm to the grim, determined face of Valerius, whose image was still projected on a side screen. The Lumina saw an ending. The humans saw a target. All ships. Valerius's voice boomed, not just over the comms, but through the very structure of the atrium, vibrating in their bones. "Target the central mass. Fire on my mark." He paused, letting the terrifying silence stretch. "Prepare to show these overgrown dust bunnies what a real monster looks like." The tachyon lance, powered by the desecrated heart of a peaceful civilization, began to glow. Humanity was about to answer the question of what happens when an unstoppable force meets a species that has made an art form out of being an immovable object. The universe held its breath. The silent swarm, a being of pure entropy, did not communicate, did not threaten, it simply was. And its being meant the unbeing of everything else. It flowed into the Lumos system like a tide of ink, its leading edge dissolving stray asteroids and interstellar dust with a terrifying lack of spectacle. There was no flash, no explosion, just a quiet, inexorable erasure. Against this cosmic inevitability stood the human fleet, a collection of steel-gray splinters, insignificant in scale but buzzing with a defiant, furious energy. On the bridge of the Tiamat's wrath, the only sound was the calm, synthesized voice of Ares counting down the final seconds of the tachyon lance's charge cycle. Valerius stood immobile, his gaze fixed on the roiling black mass on the view screen. He was not watching a foe, he was watching a concept, the physical manifestation of the end of all things, and he had every intention of punching it in the face with a star. "Mark," he said, his voice flat, motionless. The command was unnecessary. Every weapon in the fleet fired in the same microsecond. A storm of kinetic slugs, hyper-velocity missiles, and searing plasma beams erupted from the human ships, not as a primary attack, but as a diversion. They were the opening chords of a symphony of violence, designed to draw the swarm's attention, to force the decentralized consciousness to focus its defensive capabilities. The projectiles vanished into the blackness with no effect, swallowed whole. It was like throwing pebbles into a black hole, but it worked. Tactical displays flickered, showing the swarm's outer layers hardening, its amorphous form momentarily coalescing to negate the futile assault. It had taken the bait. Then, from the heart of the human formation, a new light was born. Lumos itself seemed to scream as the heart, its singularity pushed beyond every conceivable safety limit, unleashed a torrent of raw power into the focusing array. For a single, terrifying moment, a second sun blazed in the system. The tachyon lance fired. It was not a beam of light or energy in any conventional sense. It was a lance of pure, weaponized causality, a roaring distortion in space-time that tore across the void. It struck the swarm's central mass, and for the first time, the silent entity reacted. The impact did not create an explosion. It created a wound. A shimmering, silver tear appeared in the heart of the blackness, a place where the fundamental laws of physics were being violently rewritten. The swarm shuddered, its cohesive form fracturing as the lance's payload of chaotic temporal energy was unleashed. Pockets of the swarm flickered in and out of existence, some aged billions of years in a nanosecond, decaying into inert dust. Others were reversed in time, decompiling back into the raw matter and energy from which they had been formed. It was a weapon the Lumina could never have conceived of, a weapon that didn't just kill, but attacked the very definition of being alive. But the swarm was vast. The wound, though catastrophic, was not fatal. The black mass began to writhe, to pull itself back together, its shattered consciousness fighting to reassert control. It was injured, enraged, and it turned its full, undivided attention on the source of its pain, the human fleet. "It's adapting," Rostova yelled, her hands a blur over her console. It's rerouting its deconstruction protocols, forming a quantum stable shield around the impact zone. Lance is ineffective against the new signature. Of course it is, Valerius growled, a flicker of savage satisfaction in his eyes. He had never expected one shot to be enough. That wasn't the human way. All ships, execute scorched earth, he commanded. The fleet broke formation. This was not a retreat. It was an advance into madness. The smaller, faster frigates surged forward, their engines burning white-hot. They dove directly at the swarm, not firing, but accelerating to their maximum possible velocity. This was the brutal calculus of human warfare. The frigates were not ships anymore. They were bullets. Their fusion cores intentionally destabilized to turn them into city-sized, dirty bombs. They slammed into the swarm, and this time, the impacts were not silent. They detonated with the fury of dying stars, ripping gaping holes in the entity's regenerating form. The sacrifice bought the rest of the fleet precious seconds. As the swarm reeled, its attention divided between the Lance's temporal wound and the suicidal frigate attacks. Valerius played his final, desperate card. "Ares," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Open the back door." On the main screen, a single, heavily encrypted file was transmitted from the Tiamat's wrath directly into the shimmering wound the Tachyon lance had torn in the swarm's heart. It was not a weapon. It was not a virus. It was information. It was the complete, uncensored, unharmonized history of the human race. It was every war, every genocide, every act of betrayal and slaughter. It was the cold logic of the Manhattan Project, the brutal mathematics of trench warfare, the savage philosophies of Machiavelli and Sun Tzu. It was the H-bomb, the concentration camp, the Spanish Inquisition. It was every dark, bloody, terrible secret the Concordance had tried to bury. It was the unfiltered, predatory essence of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its food chain, not by being the strongest, but by being the most murderously creative. The swarm was a containment protocol, a program designed to deconstruct matter and energy according to a logical, if alien, set of rules. It understood physics, energy, matter. It did not understand malice. It did not understand hate. It did not understand the concept of a creature that would burn down its own house just to see its enemy choke on the smoke. The flood of pure, weaponized human psychosis was a logic bomb that the swarm's consciousness could not parse. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The swarm stopped. Its roiling, endless consumption ceased. Its form began to convulse. Not from damage, but from confusion. It was a perfect calculating machine that had just been fed an irrational number. It was trying to harmonize with an idea that was the antithesis of harmony. The blackness began to shimmer, to bleed colors it had never known, the angry red of rage, the sickly green of envy, the deep violet of despair. It was feeling, for the first time, the chaotic, violent emotions that humanity had mastered millennia ago, and it was tearing itself apart. The perfect party. Silent entity began to scream, not a sound, but a psychic shriek of agony and confusion that echoed in the minds of every living being in the system. Then, with a final, silent implosion, the silent swarm, the reality-ending terror, the ultimate expression of disharmony, simply ceased to exist, defeated not by a bigger weapon, but by a darker idea. Silence returned to the Lumos system, but it was a new kind of silence. It was heavy, ringing, filled with the ghosts of what had just transpired. The human fleet battered and scarred, with a third of its number sacrificed, held its position in the void. On Lumos, in the Grand Atrium, Prelate Theron stood beside Alara Vance, his crystalline form pulsing with a slow, dim light. He had just witnessed the salvation of his entire civilization, and it was the most horrifying thing he had ever seen. He turned to Alara, the translator rendering his chiming tones as a whisper filled with dawning comprehension and infinite dread. You didn't just defeat it," he said. "You infected it. You weaponized your own soul." Alara watched the human ships begin their slow, deliberate maneuvers to secure the system. "No, Prelate," she replied, her voice weary but firm. "We didn't. We just reminded it what it was trying to contain. The war was over. The Concordance was saved. But the beautiful, fragile piece of the galaxy was shattered forever. The other species had seen humanity's lullaby, our art, our philosophy. Now they had heard our choir, and they finally understood that the most terrifying thing about the reformed, harmonious humans was not the monster they had once been, but the fact that the monster was still there, sleeping just behind the eyes, waiting patiently for the lullaby to end. The age of harmony was over. The age of humanity had begun.